Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session, and hi from 12 miles north of Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. Before we get started, let's just quickly give a shout out to our production staff, to our translators, Valerie and Whitney, to our moderator, Amanda, the conference staff, Ryan and Laura and team putting this on. So cheers to you guys. So as we think about design, we'll start with this quote and move on to the agenda. But we want to set the tone around this concept that there is no design-free world. And Iris Bonnet is quoting this from Harvard. And what we're seeing is our world is continuously shaped and reshaped through design. Design is fundamental, design is built into everything. And because it starts first, we have the great opportunity to set the foundation well and therefore build accessibility in from the design phase. So we're going to think about this concept from a historical perspective. Then we're going to ensure that we're using the same terminology the same way. Then we'll talk about some aspirational aspects and some frameworks you can use. We'll look at some tactical strategies for optimizing your design phase. And then we'll start to dream big and move into our question and answers. So with history, what we're going to explore is why are we still designing based on a 19th century construct? As we think about design through history, or just history in general, we see in the first bullet the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. And with that brought standardization and globalization. It brought a huge manufacturing shift. We moved from making things by hand to making them by machine. This brought uniformity and quality. And I want to point out at this time, because we're going to come back to it, is it's based on the male form. And we also see it's based on Pareto's normal distribution model. And that's going to become important later in our conversation. So as we move to World War II and the polio endemic, what we start to see is the pendulum swing back to uniqueness and the need for uniqueness. Prosthetic limb weight distribution and adjustable designs for prosthetic limbs needed to come to effect because they needed to fit the majority of the human body. In 1955, we see the Dreyfus charts, but it's based on 95% on the male and female US population, but they're used around the world. In 1974, those Dreyfus charts were updated to include the elderly and people with disabilities. We jump forward more in time to 1995, where we see Ronald Mace, who's an architect. He introduces the concept of universal design. It wasn't until 2003, despite having the data from 1974, that we see the US Department of Transportation use its first female crash test dummy. So adoption is historically difficult. Even to this interesting statistic from 2017, 81 billion, with a B, individual socks are being manufactured annually, cookie cutter socks for all different shapes and sizes of feet all around the world. Let's move on to some terms. Let's align on common definitions because we're going to need those later. Universal design. There's multiple definitions here. There's multiple definitions around the world. And even as I was creating these slides, what I was always seeing when I was researching things is that people are misusing the term. So we want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. And we see in the bottommost bold, we also see a red arrow highlighting it, is the definition that universal design is what's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. It started with products and objects and architecture. And it was intended to accommodate as many users as possible. The median, right? We're back to that distribution model. So regardless of how far or how broad you take into account that bell curve, there's always going to be somebody on the edges that is left out. In this graphic, the traditional bell model, what we see at the apex of the bell, or the center of the diagram, is the average person. And then the distribution of the population in that famous bell curve shape, we see the middle is the most people, the majority of the people. And those some people are on either side, the left and the right. This was then coined to be the difficult 20%. It's not taking into account diversity and complexity. Therefore, it's leading to underserved and bias. Vegetable peeler. We use it every day. In the left image, we see a very old vegetable peeler. It wasn't universal. It was specific for one type of hand. It got rusty. We see that it's almost the entire size of your palm, and it is a horizontal blade. But in 50s, we see the Jonas peeler. There's millions of these produced around the world still today. It was stainless steel. It changed the blade to be vertical, and it became ambidextrous. Thus, we start to see the proliferation of this because it affected more people. Jumping to the next design concept, we see sensory design. It's a version of universal design that fosters inclusion. Ellen Luken, Andrea Lips brought this to the forefront because it is a design that supports everybody's opportunity to receive information, explore the world around them through sensory, all 5 senses. It's instilling social inclusion by the nature of it, and it's trying to blend universal design and the acknowledgement of individuality. This was adopted by the University of North Carolina in their design program, and it includes 7 principles: equitable use, flexibility in use, simple, intuitive, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for approach and use. As we jump to inclusive design, we see it describes methodologies to create products that understand and enable people of all backgrounds and abilities. So now we're looking at the diversity of the experience. What does the person using it or the UI affect? Are there groups that are excluded that could be included? It's about eliminating points of exclusion. It starts to consider the full range of human diversity, whether that's ability, language, culture, gender, age, and any other type of human difference. So it starts to empower designers to create products that serve more and many people. We start to see that a solution that would work for a person with disability is likely to work for others. And more importantly, it's a methodology of how to approach design. It is an outcome. Now, Microsoft has a statement: designing inclusively doesn't mean you're making one thing for all people. You're designing a diversity of ways for everyone to participate and experience within a sense of belonging. They have great design materials that they make free for everybody to use around the world based on this inclusive design principle. From one of their graphics, we see in the center of the screen, the solve for one, extend to many concept. And this is important because it's going to build one of our approaches, our frameworks later on. Now, as we think about that distribution model where we have 80% of the majority and then 20%, the difficult 20% that has been coined, and we break that further up, we start to see a diversity pyramid starting to arise, where we see people that have no difficulties, minimal difficulties, mild difficulties, severe difficulties. And then can those be accommodated for? And of course, now we move the endpoints to be more inclusive, but we still are going to have outliers, something we're going to have to target with specialized products. So as we return to our vegetable peeler, we see in the 90s, OXO the CEO's wife had arthritis, and he decided what would be great is if he could concept a vegetable peeler that she could use. And so OXO went through a lot of work, and we see in the image on the left, there's lots of different handle types that they went through, but they went to market with 14 different handle types to allow different disabilities and abilities to be able to peel vegetables. Now, ironically, in the central image, what we see is they return with the older version, the horizontal blade, but they make it more universal. Another example of an inclusive product is scissors, which is what we see on the right. Traditional scissors use 2 fingers or maybe 3 fingers, and they're very hard to operate with grip strength issues. But here we see extending that grip strength to include the entire hand and changing the handle types for different grip dexterity starts to make a common set of scissors that everybody has in their junk jar in the kitchen now can be used by more people. This starts to derive the concept of niche products. So in this graphic, what we're seeing on the right is the mass production, universal design, the vast majority of people. And then we start to see niche products starting to be developed to service those harder, difficult 20%. And then we start to see the concept of one-offs. So this is taking that disability pyramid and starting to think about it in manufacturing groups. A niche utensil example might be a gyro spoon for people with motor skill issues like Parkinson's. So this stabilizes the food in the spoon head so that someone with motor disabilities can feed themselves. So moving to an accessible design, we see that it's a design process which the needs of people with disabilities are specifically considered. Accessibility sometimes refers to the characteristics that products, services, and facilities can be used independently by people regardless of their ability. This accessible design concept is outcome-based. It's based on meeting a set of standards or guidelines and definitions, such as the WCAG or other sets of standards. Moving to usable design, we see that it serves to create products that are easy and efficient to use, focusing on operational learning and the ability to remember how to use it when they return at a later time. A simple example of this might be a mobile app's login. Is your design for the login and the user flow and the screen and the fields intuitive enough that they know how to register for the first time and then how to log in subsequently thereafter? Is it similar to what they've seen in other applications, but uniquely on brand for your particular product? Do you put the requirements of the password creation up front in their face? Or does your flow require them to try a password only to be told later that it wasn't the characteristics that were needed or defined? So moving into our next phase of the conversation, we want to talk about horizons. Where is your objective? Where are you trying to get to? Where's your program now? We can akin this to an example of sailing. You're trying to get in your sailboat, you're trying to get across the lake, you see the horizon, that's where you want to head to. And we know that we need to assess the situation as we go across the lake. Winds change, conditions change, and maybe you have to change tacks and zigzag across the lake to get there. It's not a straight line. So let's think about some aspiration and some frameworks you can use. And the first thing I want to set the stage with is this is difficult. But why? As designers, you're going to actively work against a 200-year-old system that's ingrained into our society. But if you keep calm and carry on, you'll get there. And a good way to exemplify this is Twins Day in Foley, Alabama in 2019. there were two students, Tanner and Miles, and Miles was telling his mom on and on and on about how he was going to be twins on Twins Day with his friend Tanner, that they looked exactly alike. And so Miles' mom bought them matching outfits. And the teacher sent her the photo that you see on the screen of Tyler and Tanner standing, Tanner and Miles standing together as twins. And what we see in this image is that they're different heights. They have different weight ratios. One's, skinny, one's a little heavier. One has straight hair, one has curly hair, one has blonde hair, the other one has dark hair. They have different color eyes, they have different color skin. But in their mind, they were twins. We need to fight the status quo to bring change. You need to recognize that the system you're working in has been conditioned, so therefore you're working against that grain. And most importantly, recognize that bias is learned, and we have to break that. So what we're aspiring to is to be in that world of intersectionality between inclusivity, usability, and accessibility. So this is a recommended framework. We're going to talk about it in detail. Big asterisk on this is, keep in mind it's generalized. Your approach is going to depend on your program maturity, your organizational support, your products, your industry, and many other factors. But it's based on these concepts that we've talked about: universal design, accessible design, usability, inclusive design. So we're going to start with number one. Table stakes, as the big arrow is pointing out. Using universal design, or the 80-20 rule, you want to make sure that your product is working for the majority of people, right? This is just business sense. And most importantly, it's functional. We can't work on a broken product. That means that, it's not going to 404 pages. The user's journey flow is completable, all those things, right? You have a sound product. That's table stakes. And I'm going to pause here and stress, this is just one model. We're basing this recommendation on many different customers we see, many different customers we've worked with, my 25 years experience in industry, both in service design and user experience design and in accessibility, right? So it's just one model. You can tweak the model. You can build off this model. You can change the model to what you need to. But in general, this is a workable model that we see proven time and time again. So as we move to the second phase, we start thinking about standards, accessibility. Ensure you're meeting whatever standard you're setting. WCAG 2.0, 2.1 AA, 2.2, EN 301549, 508, AOTA, whatever your standard is going to be, make sure then that you focus on getting that working. Right now, you're going to pick up another segment of the population in that distribution model. Going to 3, we see now work on inclusive and diverse. The Microsoft recommendation. Now start extending to many and many more groups and improving for your broader customer base, fixing things for unique cases, and then ultimately into 4, your niche and edge cases, your small batch solutions, because now you'll get even more problems fixed and take on a larger distribution model. And of course, we also want to ensure that it's multi-channel successful. Desktop, laptop, tablet, responsive, mobile, everything, right? We want to make sure that all the digital properties, not just one, but all of them are moving down the field. They could be running concurrently, or they could be staggered. But moving in the same models and the same processes, repeatability now brings scale. Then we start considering beyond digital, considering every consumer touch point, from operations to strategy, from product design to marketing experience. We want to engage every team that contributes to your user's experience, the collective experience, email, phone support, in-person support, marketing, consumer complaints. everything needs to be part of it. But if you can't get the basis down, it's hard to focus on these other things. Now, you may have a joyous experience and you have a lot of investment and you have a lot of traction that you could start doing this concurrently. That's fantastic. But more than likely, it's going to come as a separate stream or multiple separate streams further down your maturity process. Understand the balance between users and business goals and find that balance. It's never going to be perfect. Finding that balance brings in all the stakeholders on something they can agree on. And ultimately, we all wish that everything would be perfect and everybody would do this all the time. But the practicality is it doesn't happen. So again, this is an approach, a model that you can apply to move things quickly. So let's think about those tactics to mature. How do you optimize? And I hope, regardless of whether you are, a novice designer or a seasoned designer, whether you're a novice at accessibility or a seasoned accessibility person, there's going to be some nugget in here that you're not currently doing that you can start working on, right? So there's something hopefully in here for everyone. Shifting left, focusing on accessibility during the design phase is going to reduce defects by 67%. You're going to wring out those defects before they're even coded. It's the most cost-effective time to do the work during the design phase. As your grandpa or your industrial arts teacher taught you, right? Plan and measure twice, develop once. And most importantly, remember to measure your progress. Shout out your success. Scream your accolades. Whether you use the term tenets, maxims, heuristics, rules of thumb, we're going to use tenets. So here are some tenets to be thinking about. Provide structure and hierarchy, meaningful sequences, consistency across the user journey, consistency across the UI. Links should be meaningful. Always provide multiple ways to do something. Don't force the user into a single way or your way. Don't use color as the only visual means for conveying information. Ensure sufficient contrast between text and its background. Design focus states. Remember the fundamentals, especially on forms. And by this, I mean the design fundamentals and accessibility fundamentals. Design for the sake of design increases cognitive load and often require user learning. Making a unique login sequence might be cool, but you're going to use the user if they have to learn your specific model of logging in. Hover does not improve findability. Ensure you're providing role name value. Have skip options, logical tab order, define keyboard shortcuts. Be careful with touch target size. Browser opening cadences should be communicated. Responsive design, alt text, font, typography, letter spacing, line lengths, all lumped together. Color contrast, readability, reading levels, and acronyms. Anything other than left justification is going to increase your cognitive load. But the cardinal tenet is referencing W3C's authoring practices for design patterns. If you were to start one place, be familiar with that. Make sure all your designers in your program are familiar with those. So we start to gain traction by defining who. On the screen, we're showing Ontario's graphic of who's responsible for accessibility. Managers, designers, developers, accessibility SMEs or gurus, UX designers, researchers, product owners, writers, QA. Everybody has a role in digital accessibility. No one is exempt. So you're going to start defining who is doing what. You're going to ask your org who is responsible to define the criteria that developers and testers, that's critical, and testers need to know. I can't tell you how many customers that I work with that move through things, and that's great. They're making traction, but then they stop making traction. And the number one reason is they don't know who is responsible for doing what. Therefore, people start making assumptions. This very first bullet, we're going to expand beyond just the bullet and talk about alt text. Who is tasked to write the alt text? Is it the designer? Is it the content author? Is it the developer? More importantly, what is it? How does the tester know whether it's supposed to be decorative text or not? How is that happening? If you don't have all those things defined, then someone's going to make the assumption. The developer is going to make a choice to make it decorative when it wasn't meant to be. And the tester is going to pass it because no one said it was supposed to be otherwise. Who's responsible for documenting focusing in tab order? And where is it located? What about hierarchical levels? What about role name value? This one is overlooked by many organizations. When we think about Jira, do you write individual accessibility requirements in your Jira ticket? Or is it assumed at a much higher level, like operating systems and browser levels, that accessibility is baked in as an overarching or umbrella requirement? Because if everyone's not on the same page about that, then they're only going to test what's written in the Jira story. Who's responsible to ensure that the build matches the design? Again, most digital teams are moving so quickly that the designer does the design, the developer goes and develops it, the tester goes and tests it, and it goes out into production. And no one ever checks to make sure that what was asked to be designed was actually built. So now we have the who, we have the what. Now we need the how. Documentation. And we can have philosophical conversations about this a lot, how much documentation is enough, right? But if you make a universal document, and if it's well documented, it's not subject to interpretation, but more importantly, that documentation becomes anticipatory, and it's going to save you operational costs because everybody knows where it is and what their role is. It becomes multiple purpose, and all roles are able to use a single document. And for those in a regulatory environment, remember, documentation is required to be saved. So your build should be matching your design. Then start layering peer-to-peer reviews in with designers. Make sure they're looking through that design as an oral checklist, a second set of eyes. You should be talking about standards and expectations. Are your annotations easy and clear to follow? If they're not, then they could be subject to interpretation. Design and developers, and again, testers, critical. Their collaboration across all three roles. If you're not talking about whether your concept is buildable before you start your design, you're going to fail in that design. Your design should be blueprints. They need to be understandable. They need to be interpreted the same way by every developer. And the only way to do that is collaboration. Near and constant, it should be second nature. Otherwise, you're designing in a vacuum. So don't design in a vacuum, and include your testers as you go along so that they know what they should be testing. For those with the design systems, make sure that your documentation includes accessibility annotations. Are your tab orders documented? Are your role name value documented in here so that they know what the expected test results are? Ensure that you are showing what success criteria were tested when it's on a standalone component, and remind your developers that they need to retest. Just because they're using an approved component that is documented as being accessible doesn't mean that they don't skip testing. They need to test that in pseudo on the page to ensure all the other contextual accessibility guidelines are taken into account. Start applying design thinking. Now we have a complex drawing here of an infinity symbol, and it starts in the lower left or green where it's labeled define. Right? You want to define what the challenge is, and then you go all the way up to the upper right in this diagram, we see the ideation. brainstorming ideas, good, bad, or indifferent. Start talking and communicating. Coming around our diagram, we see in the lower right prototype in orange. You're going to make a fast, cheap prototype to then start testing, which is the middle intersection. And then going into empathy, research, observation, understanding, creating points of view, and fine-tuning it and bringing it back around. As we see with the US Digital Service, design with users, not for them. Nothing about us without us. Make sure you're testing with people with disabilities. The next one is Agile retrospectives. I talked to lots of companies. I can't tell you how many Agile shops don't have retrospectives at all. The whole point of Agile is to learn from your mistakes and improve next iteration, but they're not discussing it. Accessibility needs to be part of those Agile retrospective conversations. You have to improve quality. Asking the core question, could this defect have been prevented in the design phase? If so, study it to root cause, enhance the training in the process, maybe even consider microcurricula. Like if you have a repeat problem you're seeing across multiple designs, across multiple digital products, get everybody on the same page and retrain everybody on that one specific defect so you're not making it again in the future. Make sure your designers are working within Jira so that they can get the feedback through the tickets. And use Jira for quality improvement, right? You can take those things and potentially put them in your backlog. Even documentation fixes could be managed inside of Jira. Don't overlook user complaints. We see efficient programs take user complaints into account. They study the defects to root cause. They understand why the process fails. They examine whether the issue is rooted in the user's preference. What can be learned and fed back through the quality loop? This is what your accessibility SMEs excel at. Use them for this type of work and track this through the entire life cycle. Don't forget to keep the user informed of your progress. Personas. The easiest way to answer this statement is, we get this question asked a lot, what should we do about personas? There's many ways to solve it. There's not one right way, there's no wrong way. But ensure that you're including disability in your personas. Pick a model and use it consistently. Make sure that you're thinking about permanent, temporary, and situational as well. Create that spectrum. Identify mismatches. Microsoft information is great in this aspect to help you think through all those different mismatches. For our Figma users, don't forget Axe for Design. We had other sessions in this, and the product announcement, that auto annotation feature is coming into the product. It's dashboarding and reporting, right? So you can take this information into design review. Did you consider accessibility? Did you test for accessibility at the design level? Yes, here's my results. Make it part of your design review requirement to get your design into that phase and then ultimately off to development. Show that you've worked through your design problems. So let's think about how you go next. We have two examples about positive momentum, and the first one is the World Design Organization. Design issues are very complex and diverse, and they're awfully closely related to the quality of the lives of their citizens, all citizens, including people with disabilities. And what we see is the largest cities in the world are now starting to take to that next level of maturity by assigning job functions called Chief Design Officer. They are examining all the different processes, from physical to applications to digital, every way we intersect as a community in our everyday lives to build intersection, improve through design the way we live and interact with anything, physical or digital. Helsinki is the latest one to hire it, plus Seoul is the other city. And lastly, Glen Lake in Minnesota. The story is that, during the pandemic, or, as we were waning out of the pandemic and starting to go back in person, this school has 9 wheelchair-bound children, and their friends were really upset that they couldn't play on the playground with their wheelchair friends. And so they worked with their school and their teachers to set a goal to raise $300,000 to build an inclusive playground. And they exceeded that. They met it. And so they set another goal for $500,000, and they met it. So they've now set a $900,000 goal to make accessible playgrounds for the entire district. So as we start working on things, there's lots of different heuristics, rules of thumbs, tenets that you can apply. Just keep applying them, keep whittling it down, keep improving, keep changing the goalposts, keep going. We talk about burnout. There's a whole session on it. If you haven't seen it yet, go back and watch it on the replay. But find the strength, keep going, keep moving the target. It gets better. And that will move to questions.
Wonderful, Matthew. Thank you so much for this great presentation. We had some really excellent questions from our participant, and I will move us into those at this point. Our first question is, do you have any advice when executives want to implement UX elements that were not designed with accessibility in mind, even when you've provided data stating that it's a bad idea? For example, complex menus, carousels, animations, etc.
My answer is going to be not a popular one, so send the hate mail if you want. My answer is don't fight it. There are bigger things to fight. Pick battles that you're going to win. Figure out ways to change the dialogue. Figure out ways to come back to that conversation. Because what I have found, both in my personal experience and working with our clients, is that if you let that go into production, it will get its due. Whether it's karma or, just life in general. That carousel that is bad design from the 80s or inaccessible, consumer's going to complain about it, or it's going to fail a test or whatever, and it's going to come back around in conversation. So don't worry about it. There's so much, firsthand, all of you designers, there's so much to do. Developers too, there's so much to do. There's too much work to do, too few people, right? Don't burn yourself out on trying to fight that battle. Pick a different battle, right? Pick the battles you can win, because with battles that you can win, you can start to prove traction through enumeration, through statistics, through customer surveys, right? And that's going to change the tide, right? Fighting someone over a carousel is not the battle.
Thank you so much. I really like the connection that you made to burnout, and I think it's really great advice to just keep coming back to different ways to approach that problem. Another question asked was, could you speak more about the question you posed at 11:28 regarding tab order? Who is responsible for deciding, designer or developer? I'm sure organizations do this differently, but could you speak to some examples?
Sure. Let's think about tab order in a component in a design simple. Design system, just because it's simple, it's small, it's easy, right? Let's just say it's a form. The logical tab order is going to be, top to bottom, field after field after field. That's the logical progression. That's top to bottom, right? It follows general rules. But what about the form, and you're going to see this in your everyday life, that jumps to zip code first and then to state or city, right? It's a reverse order than the visual logic or the user logic of how you fill out a form. In Europe, filling out the zip code is the primary function, And then that auto-populates often the city and the state or county or region. But in the United States, it's a different order. It's put in your city, put in your state, put in your zip code. That's what we've been trained to do. If the developer is in a different country, maybe their tab order, their logic order is based on the European model versus the US model, right? Who's the audience? They're going to guess, or they're going to imply. If you don't specify the tab order, then how does the tester know what the order is that they're supposed to check? If it's supposed to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you should specify it. The developer develops that way, the tester confirms it. But if there's no documentation, if it's not stated anywhere, then how is the tester supposed to know that it doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, 7, 6, 10? Right? You got to document all this stuff. And it seems labor intensive. Totally get it. But once you build good documentation systems and templates and things like that, it becomes super easy. Now, the next question is, where do you put it? Right? Is it in the actual annotation? Is it in a separate area called tab order? Is it in a separate document that's to the side called tab order? There's any number of ways to do it. Just be consistent.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question. Are there any strategies for identifying requirements and scope for inclusive, diverse design and niche small batch?
Could you read the question again, please?
Sure. Are there any strategies for identifying requirements and scope for inclusive, diverse design and niche small batch?
I'm going to try to answer what I think they're asking, right? So as we reflect on the presentation, right, we're going to try to make the digital property as robust for as many people out the get-go as we possibly can, right? Whether that's 80%, 90%, whatever, right? Get the majority in there, get the thing working. Then you can start focusing on the next layer, right? It's the reverse onion. It's the snowball, right? Keep adding layers to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. So as you start thinking about writing requirements, are you going to write a requirement that is so specific? Like a user that is in a certain state at a certain time of year using iOS 14 with Firefox, and like it has to be able to do that. That's, you know, getting into the niche. That's getting into the edge case. That will come later, right? First, focus on let's get everybody from this iOS version to this iOS version, from these 3 browsers in their level, and on and on and on, right? So you try to build for the majority, put those requirements in there, and then the next time around, you know, whether it's an amendment, I'll call it, an iteration on that design or that feature, or whether you're going to, in the next round, for the new feature that will replace that feature, take a broader swath, right? There's 2 different approaches there, right? You just keep going over and over and over. The requirements inside annotations aren't necessarily called out differently or documented, hey, this one's for niche and this one's for the majority, but rather you as a designer are just broadening in your own mind the requirements to take a bigger and bigger segmentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that insight on that topic.
But we'll hear. So Amanda is going to mention, right? If we don't get to your question, we're going to try to endeavor. So if whoever asked the question, it wasn't quite sure what you're looking for, please restate the question so that we can get you the right answer.
Thank you. That's also a great point. And just so everyone knows, Matthew also will make an effort to respond to any questions that remain offline after we finish. Matthew, I also wonder, our next question, can you provide any examples of times when organizations have implemented microcurricula to address knowledge gaps?
I'll use just a very simple example. This is totally made up just to try to illustrate the point. So let's hypothetically say that your brand colors are accessible.
Mhm.
And your designs assumed they didn't specify colors. And so they went off to development, and development picked from the brand colors and applied them themselves. And fingers crossed to pray that was right, and off it went. And then as we run our testing, automated testing, whatever, and we see, oh, this color contrast ratio is wrong. Okay. The microcurriculum might be, hey, just as a reminder, designers and developers, color contrast ratio should be this to meet WCAG requirements. It could be as simple as that. It could be done in a newsletter. It could be having them go back and retake just the section of a training on color contrast, right? That could be the curricula.
Mhm.
It also could be, hey, designers, our annotation standards are to define the color, and we saw these designs go out where the color wasn't specified. The lesson learned here is the developer chose the colors. We don't want that. We want to define them for them so it's easy, fast, and efficient. So design review, the microcurricula in design review might just be a simple statement of everybody, we're seeing designs come through the design review that are not meeting the annotation standards, are not specifying the colors as an annotation in this standard format. So as a reminder, we're going to be looking at that specifically for the next 3 weeks to ensure that your design annotations are meeting the standards so that the developers have less work to do and less cognitive load to build what we need them to build. So that's a different example of a microcurricula done as a quality review and an announcement.
Thank you so much. I think that those are such accessible examples, and color contrast just represents such a huge portion of issues that are often seen. Great examples. Next question, can you tell us more about Axe for designers?
I would love to be able to say yes, but I think for efficiency's sakes, the best thing would be to do is to go to the Figma community and look up Axe for designers, and you can read all about it there. Or in our AxeCon schedule, there is a session that you can look about new products where Axe for Designer latest features are discussed. So just to be efficient in time for questions, that would be my answer. Go look at those materials, and let's take another question.
Sure. Last question I think that we'll have time for. Do you have any feedback regarding incorporating accessibility into Agile retrospectives?
Well, let's start with the concept of, as I said, many companies aren't doing it, right? So work with your Agile coaches or work with your team of leaders that's responsible for the Agile process overall and ask them why they're not following the textbook that says you should be having retrospectives. I also will specify some people, depending on your region or your country, sometimes they're called showcases, retrospectives, right? Whatever your company terminology is, they all equate to the same thing, but some kind of process at the end to review what went well, what do we need to improve upon before your next cycle. So we'll call retrospective. So start there. Are they doing them? Are they not doing them? You want to get them doing them. The natural cadence of a retrospective would be to say, let's look at the defects. Do we see any themes? And then as you do this more and more and more, then you start to get into very unique situations, few defects, you focus on them, right? But you start with themes and generalizations. Some companies have labels for accessibility defects, some don't, right? So you want to think about that as well. Like, how are you classifying defects? Can you categorize them? But you want to make sure that when you're working with your Agile coaches or your ceremony moderator or your Scrum Master, whoever's doing it, pipe up and say, hey, we see some accessibility defects. Why? Right? Why aren't we talking about those? So start to introduce them. If you see themes, when you have stand-ups, different ceremony, right? You could also use that ceremony as an opportunity to say, hey, my design went through, I worked with the developer so-and-so, and they ran their automated test and they got 100 defects. Why? Because they didn't follow the annotations. They didn't follow the wireframes. They built something different than the wireframes. Can we talk about that as a whole, right? As a company or as a design practice or as a product, right? Why are we making investments in wireframes if the developer is going to just develop what they want, right? That would be the root cause to solve. And then just keep moving through that a little bit at a time, more and more conversations, because you go through each Agile process and each conversation, each retrospective, right? You start to see it gets more fine-tuned and everyone starts paying attention to it. They don't want to be called out in it as a defect or, the problem that's causing the defect. So we now start to see gamification.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We actually are at time, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. I just want to share last comment. We did have a participant who said, great job, perfect speech, and such a vital topic of importance. So thank you so much for putting this together.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your AxeCon.
Great rest of AxeCon. Bye.